Russia isn't the key decision maker in the war anymore. And Russia has spent their entire time controlling the narrative about this war, shutting down social media, shutting down dissent, shutting down any information. That parade was broadcasted all across Russian television. And Russians could see that there were no tanks, there were no missiles, it was completely stripped back, and Putin ran after 45 minutes. And they will be wondering why Russia looks so weak. Because Russians, all they care about is this bullshit military might, right, of being tough on the world stage. That's why they launched this silly Satan II Samrat missile 2 days ago to try and scare everyone when they're on the back foot. But they will be wondering slowly why this is happening, why they can't go online, and why their parade looks like rubbish.
Welcome to Channel 24. We're joined by Caolan Robertson, an Irish journalist speaking to us from Italy right now, where he visited the Venice Biennale, a space of art that Russia is once again trying to turn into another battlefield, a battle for attention, legitimacy, and its own genocidal narratives under the cover of culture. So, Caolan, welcome. Thank you for joining me. So, Caolan, you were in Venice at the very moment when the Russian pavilion returned to the Biennale for the first time in 4 years. What was the atmosphere like there? Did it still feel like an art event, or was it like more a political scandal?
It didn't feel like an art event. It felt like Europe losing its memory again, because the entire city was full of Russians, and not just regular everyday civilians, not just artists, but the top echelons of Russian society, people directly connected to the Kremlin, Russian oligarchs, roaming the streets everywhere at night, in the bars, in the restaurants, flooding the whole city. And it was way more Russian than I had expected it to be. Originally, it looked like there was going to be about 30 people from the Russian delegation to go to this event. And the Russians haven't been at the Biennale since 2022, so I thought it would be quite discreet, but it wasn't. It was completely in your face. And it looked like watching Europe experience normalization of Russia again, like it did after 2014 and like it is slowly doing now after the 2022 invasion. It was extremely depressing and actually really, really quite concerning to witness. I didn't expect it to be as bad as it was. And I was sent dossiers, and I was looking around the city and trying to connect those dossiers with the faces. Almost every single person that I saw was connected to this dossier, which showed that they were, again, ingrained with the Russian political system, either directly connected to Putin or the Kremlin or the Russian secret state or the FSB. These are high-ranking people everywhere. And Europe, I thought, had expelled and sanctioned a lot of these individuals. And that's what a lot of us think. You know, I was with friends there, and my partner, you know, we were even shocked that some of these people were here. We thought that they were completely banned from the EU. When I checked into my Airbnb, which was right in the city center, I asked who else, because they run lots of other Airbnbs, who else they've been checking in. And she said that she's been seeing Russian passports all morning, all over the city. And she runs lots and lots and lots of different Airbnbs. That's the first moment that I saw of this thing. And I said, how on earth are they here? And she said, well, some of them have Russian passports that they go through different countries, and some of them use dual passports, and they use their, Turkish passports. They'll have dual passports, and they'll use these to circumvent sanctions. But she said also, and I was looking into this at the event as well, it looks like people associated with the Biennale helped lobby to get the sanctions removed, specifically so these individuals could visit this event for the dates it was taking place, because it was to do with politics or to do with art. So it was horrible to see. And again, these people, I went to some of these parties as well. I went to some of the sort of the high society events. I could see what was going on. These Russian oligarchs were mingling with high society in Europe, with the people who are at the top of our arts and culture and our media, right? The Russians sent everyone they possibly could. They sent a massive convoy. And what I thought was strange is, originally, I thought that the reason that these Russians were here was solely just to hyper-normalize their own behavior, the terrorism that they're doing on a daily basis, to make them look like less of a pariah to the outside world. And that's true, that's definitely the case. But afterwards, in the last 48 hours, if you look at the coverage, most of what Russia's been putting out has been on Russian television. They use their biggest journalists to do this. And I think it's because Russians are so pissed off with the way that they're living right now, with the country that Putin has dragged them into, that Russia are now having to do propaganda for Russians to pretend that everything's normal, to say, look, Russians are still on the world stage, we're still going to art events, we're still doing all of this. So it's propaganda to the outside world, but also to Russians. And it was heavily pushed to them on their televisions, on the Channel 1, Channel 2, Channel 3, Channel 4 in Russia. So it had a lot of different purposes, but the fact that Europe allowed this to happen is absolutely horrendous. And every single person involved in that Biennale needs to be investigated by the authorities in Italy. And every single one of the bank accounts need to be looked at. And we need to find out who made money from this and who was financially incentivized to have the Russian envoy pull up here in Italy.
Caolan, the picture have changed dramatically. In 2022, when I was at Biennale in Venice, Russians were silenced. They weren't there. The Russian pavilion wasn't there. Then in 2024, I was there, the same picture. But now they are taking the place, they getting back to the place massively. And you know, I saw your recently published report, documentary about Venice Biennale. And you brought a printed trophy to the exhibition, a trophy shaped by the image of a bombed hospital, a symbol of a Russian terrorism, and perhaps, you know, the only word Russian representatives truly deserve today. How did everything unfold with the trophy?
So this is a 3D printed trophy that I had made in Kharkiv just a week before the Biennale started. And I wanted to have something that visually represents the award that Russia actually deserves, right? Because Russia went to an award show. This is an exhibition to win awards. I said, if you're going to give Russia an award, it should be an award for violating international humanitarian law. They've destroyed 2,600 health facilities in Ukraine, maternity wards, hospitals. And the only thing that Russia exports, it's not culture, it's terrorism. So that's the award that they deserve. So I had that made in Ukraine, brought it with me, and I left it outside the event symbolically for a few moments to show the press, to show the people there, this is what Russia is and this is what Russia deserves. And the people inside the pavilion, the Russians, picked up the trophy, stole it, ran inside and pretended they never did it, which is the most ironic thing you can possibly imagine. The country that steals and loots everything around it and then denies it and covers it up, steals a trophy of a bombed hospital and then pretends that it never happened. This is literally a comedy that you couldn't even write yourself. I mean, this is typical Russia, right? Completely 101 their own behavior. So not that surprising. But I'm also glad that they did that, because the person that took that trophy, I did a reverse image search of his face, a PIM search, and found that he is connected to Moscow, visa schemes, helping get Russians into Europe. His wife is actually one of the major partners in the Biennale before 2022. And he's an incredibly kind of nefarious figure. And he denied even having anything to do with Biennale, denied even stealing it. And it just shows the kind of strange mafia style, honestly, Russian weirdos that are at this thing. And by the way, this is an arts festival. This is an arts exhibition that we're talking about. This isn't kind of like an exhibition of drug lords around the world. This is meant to be celebrating art. And you've got these people here behaving like the mob, intimidating people, following people. I was followed. The artists that were speaking out against Russia were followed. The people associated with Pussy Riot were followed. I got followed 4 or 5 times by these people around the city at an arts exhibition. What on earth kind of arts exhibition has people following around journalists asking questions? An arts exhibition that's been infiltrated by lawlessness, which is what Russia represents, which is what Russia sent and did. And so it went from something that should be very beautiful, very cultural, an exhibit of the best and brightest around the world, to something genuinely insidious. And that's what happens when you invite the Russians every single time. And that's what I saw in the streets of Venice. And the saddest part is, there's a woman in this documentary that I made, and I interviewed her. She's an artist that's been there for 20 years, Katia Margolis, and she's been speaking out against the Russians in the city about the funding, about how it's just a cover for their war crimes. And she has been personally followed. She's told me in the last few days she's really worried about her safety. She's an artist at the world's most prestigious art exhibition, and she has to worry for her safety for speaking out against Russia. This is the most ridiculous and absurd situation you can imagine. But this is what happens when you invite criminals to your events. If you have a house party, you start inviting violent criminals, and you start wondering why everything's getting smashed up and broken. You should ask yourself why you invited the worst of society. And this is what the organizers of the Venice Biennale should be asking themselves right now, because what they've done is honestly horrendous.
Yeah, I was surprised. Surprised is a very slight word. When you were saying in your documentary about being followed and being, watched by someone, filmed by someone, did you feel in danger?
I actually did, for the first time in a very long time. And I know that sounds ridiculous, because I've reported all across the front lines in Ukraine for years, but I felt more under threat from Russians in Venice than I did in Sumy, and in Donbass and in Kherson, because at least in Kherson and at least in Ukraine, you know where the Russians are. They're the other side of the front line. Whereas in Venice, they're in every cafe, restaurant. They're celebrating. In Ukraine, They're at the other side of the front line, and actually felt safer in Ukraine despite the missiles and drone attacks, because again, they're not roaming through the streets like they're being allowed to in Venice. And these are the same people, by the way, the same people that are roaming the streets of Venice and are drinking champagne or acting like everything is normal are the exact same people that are associated with the government who are launching those drones and missiles every day. They're the same criminals that pose the same threat. And it really shows the dire situation that Europe is in right now, where journalists that speak out against Russia are under more threat in Venice than they are in Ukraine. But it's true. And it's genuinely the only time and the first time I've genuinely felt under a serious threat where something could happen in the night, genuinely being followed. And that's because Europe has allowed these criminals back in, despite them being sanctioned, despite them being associated with invading and terrorizing the biggest country in Europe. We've allowed them back in because we're addicted to Russian money, and Europe has been for years, Russian gas. And so it's an absolutely disgraceful situation to be in. Europe is under attack from Russia right now. Hybrid warfare, information warfare, arson attacks nonstop. And we allow these people to roam the streets here in Italy, in countries like this. It's absolutely absurd. It made me want to immediately go back home to Kyiv, honestly.
That's very sad when I hear that Italians tolerate those Russians and drinking champagne together. And you directly confronted also a senior Russian representative at the Russian House. That was, I think, one of the first days you just arrived. What was the outcome of that confrontation? Did it lead to any consequences for him, for that building, institution, I don't know how to call it, for you personally, and how hard was it to stand in front of him and challenge him even for a few seconds face to face?
So this was the Russian ambassador, and I saw him inside the pavilion. And again, this is an art exhibition. So why is there a Russian political representative in there? Because Russia are using this art exhibition as a Trojan horse to bring in their ideas and to normalize and whitewash themselves. And I knew that he was the ambassador because he was wearing a pin that had the Russian flag on it. So I went straight up to him and tried to ask him a question, but he had a giant security team around him. Again, what kind of art exhibition, art event has massive security and all of these people around you? It just felt completely ridiculous. And this was hours after the Russians had killed dozens of Ukrainians after their fake ceasefire. And I said, why are you here using art to whitewash the fact that your country, your government, who pays you a salary, has murdered 30 Ukrainians, including children, in the last 24 hours? And his security pushed me out of the event immediately. It felt good to be able to do that myself. If I was a Ukrainian whose country was under attack every day, I'm sure I would feel very differently about it. I'm sure I'd feel much more, visceral about this, because this is, your country. But I think as a journalist, I was pretty happy to do this because no other journalist did that. No other journalist confronted any politician that was Russian or any high-profile Russians at the Venice Biennale, despite there being dozens everywhere. And I don't know why that is, honestly. I've got so many comments, thousands of comments actually in the last few days saying, why haven't the Italian press done this? Why haven't the other press done this? Why is no other journalist doing this? And I don't really know why, but I'm glad that I did, because when I did, it got massive headlines all across Italy. If you buy a newspaper here, there are constant photos and printouts of me confronting the ambassador, and the Russians came to this country to whitewash and sanitize their war crimes. And now, if Italians read their newspaper, they're not going to be reading about how great the Russians are here. They're going to be reading about the fact that the Russian ambassador was confronted about the fact that his country killed 30 people in Ukraine. So that's in Ukraine. So that's a success in my story, because they came here to sell an image, and I told people what was actually going on, and that dominated the headlines, which is great. But again, I shouldn't be the only person doing this. I think that's what's really absurd. I think that I would encourage, if you're watching this and you're a journalist, to do the same thing. Even if you're not a journalist, honestly, I think if you just are able to, you should confront anyone responsible for the crimes that the Russians are responsible for. But it wasn't just him. Russia's most famous journalist was in Venice as well, and she was in one of the most expensive kind of Michelin restaurants. She was sitting there with a billionaire, one of Russia's most connected billionaires that's sanctioned by the UK right now. His two houses in Chelsea are being held right now by the UK government. They're having a Michelin star dinner, drinking champagne, enjoying themselves, whilst creating Russian propaganda to put out on Russian television and pretending to be the Russian opposition. This is the situation that I saw there. And it's really like, yeah, I'm just glad that I confronted these people because they don't want cameras anywhere near them. They don't want people interfering with their image. And my reporting did, which is good.
Before we move to another topic, I just want to ask you, in general, was the Russian pavilion popular over there in Venice?
It was very popular. And that's exactly what the Russians wanted. I didn't think it would be. I thought it would be impossible to even access, but it was full of people. And the most important thing is, I thought, and a lot of other people thought, that the pavilion was closed down, like it wasn't going to be open, or it wouldn't matter because it wouldn't be open to the public. But the most important week was the pre-opening week. That's when the tickets were expensive. That's when the journalists were there. That's when high society was in town. That's when all the people that mattered was in town. That's when everyone was there. Everyone arrives on the 6th and leaves on the 9th. And that pavilion was wide open and it was full of performances. It was full of music. They had an open bar upstairs where they had free gin and tonic and free champagne. And it was full on the terrace, people laughing and drinking. It was honestly constantly full from people all over the world. And a lot of people who were in that pavilion who were just there for the champagne, who didn't really know what Russia was doing, who didn't really care. And this is what Russia wanted. This is why they offered free drinks. And, you know, again, it's very dangerous to think, well, they weren't open to the rest of the public after the 9th, so it doesn't matter. They opened when it did matter. And actually, Russia are probably glad that they don't have to keep it open after the 9th of May because they don't have to pay any staff. They don't need to. I mean, they got what they wanted and they took off on a plane back to Moscow. And it was a success for them. So it was full of people enjoying themselves, having a good time, drinking their free stuff, paid for by the state. And it was so depressing to see. And I blurred her face in this report, but I was with a Ukrainian girl who was horrified. I was walking in with her. She didn't want to be identified, but she was shocked how many people were there enjoying themselves and having a great time, knowing her country was being bombed every 5 seconds. And this is the situation in Europe, you know, as you would be. So unfortunately, it was busy, open till close every single day. I would say thousands of people walked through those doors.
Caolan, have you had an opportunity to watch Russian parade on May 9?
I watched what was left of the Russian parade. I watched what Ukraine allowed Russia to do, which was to walk around with the North Koreans, the only other army in the world without Wi-Fi. You know, is pretty embarrassing. But it should be the last parade that Russia is ever allowed to hold, because there was a deal that was set up that Trump stupidly moderated that said, you can hold your little parade for 5 minutes if you give Ukraine 1,000 prisoners of war and if you stop bombing Ukraine for a while. And Russia broke both of those promises immediately. And so this should be the last time that Ukraine allows Russia to ever have their little parade ever again. And also, actually, what's wild about this is if you told me or anyone else, or if I told you in 2022 that Putin would have to ask for permission from Ukraine to be able to hold a little parade on May 9th, I would have thought, a Victory Day parade, I would have thought that was ludicrous, right? I would have thought that was impossible. But now Russia isn't the key decision maker in the war anymore. You know, this is the last time they'll be able to do this. And it looked pathetic. And Russia has spent their entire time controlling the narrative about this war, shutting down social media, shutting down dissent, shutting down any information. That parade was broadcasted all across Russian television. And Russians could see that there were no tanks, there were no missiles, it was completely stripped back, and Putin ran after 45 minutes. And they will be wondering why Russia looks so weak. Because Russians, all they care about is this bullshit military might, right, of being tough on the world stage. That's why they launched this silly Satan II Samrat missile 2 days ago to try and scare everyone when they're on the back foot. But they will be wondering slowly why this is happening, why they can't go online and why their parade looks like rubbish. And so, you know, I think this is also why Russia launched such an egregious and disgraceful attack on Ukraine over the last 24 hours, destroying residential buildings and hospitals in Kyiv, firing 1,500 drones in 24 hours, because they are mortified and embarrassed and humiliated. And all Russia knows and the only thing Russia knows in that situation when they're embarrassed is to terrorize other countries because they behave like a pathetic nation, right? It's absolutely horrific. And we'll be seeing more of this, I imagine, the more Russia sort of gets more and more cornered and more afraid. And look, this parade happened at the same time that Putin is still hiding in bunkers, that his aides can't use their phones, that his aides are being surveilled, where air defense systems are being moved around constantly just to try and defend, you know, little parades. This is at a time where Russia is seriously on the back foot and seriously cornered. And so they're lashing out as much as possible. And I don't think that Russia is going to have a Victory Day parade next year. If this year has looked like this, It was already stripped back by about 90%. I don't think there'll be anything left yet next year. Hopefully there'll be no soldiers even available to march. So I doubt they'll even have one next year, the way things are going.
Only if it's a Ukrainian soldiers marching. Well, I know we don't need that.
As well,
we don't need that, okay? But, you know, can we say that Russia is weakening while still having the possibility to make such a massive attacks on Ukrainian cities like it was before this night? Hundreds of drones, dozens of rockets, you know, civilians were killed, children were killed. But still, everybody's talking about that Russia is weakening. But how it's going along together with the message that with actual striking so massively Ukrainian cities?
So that's the dichotomy with this. It's destroying residential buildings and hospitals is a sign of weakness for a country because this is a last resort. It's to terrorize, because if you can't win on the battlefield and you can't win a propaganda war, then you terrorize civilians. So it's a sign of Russia being weak politically and ideologically. That doesn't mean they're running out of drones. That doesn't mean they're running out of supplies. But their troops are being taken out faster than they can be replenished right now, and they haven't made any advances on the front lines, and they look crap and weak on the world stage. So this is a representation of Russia's weakness right now. And I know it's hard to say that and hard to look at that because people are being killed every day, and it's still horrific and it's still atrocious and it still has an impact forever. But it's in its last grasps of a weakness stage to be behaving like this. So if Russia was in a sign of strength, they wouldn't be bombing Ukraine today. They would be celebrating major advances in the east and south of Ukraine, and they aren't. And that's why they're doing what they're doing right now. And this will continue until Russia is forced to stop. We have this weird idea right now because Russia keeps talking about ceasefires and being on the negotiating table, that somehow Russia will be forced into morality. That isn't going to happen. Russia is only going to stop doing this when it is forced to stop. And that's through isolation and sanctions into the abyss. Until it's completely crippled economically. But that is possible if everybody outside of Ukraine stops listening to the bullshit that comes from Russia about peace and looks at the buildings that have been collapsed and destroyed and the people being pulled out of the rubble in the last 24 hours. That's how this ends.
Caolan, the negotiation process seems stuck, and Russia appears to be trying to push its own preferred mediator into Europe, someone openly seen as a Russian lobbyist, a man long associated with the Kremlin's interest. I'm talking about former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. Should Europe, I know he's not going to be in charge. It's absolutely ridiculous. But should Europe take a leading role in negotiation process right now? If they continue, or should the United States remain the main mediator?
I think all of this is pretty much irrelevant, and I think Ukraine understands this. Ukraine has been very patient with Europe and with the United States right now, and they've listened every single time Trump or a European official has demanded some sort of peace negotiations. And Ukraine has turned up to the table every single time and offered peace every single time, and Russia has declined it every single time. And I don't think anyone who's anywhere near power right now, including him or Trump, is going to change anything. Ukraine is just symbolically showing up at this point. So I don't think it really matters who's in charge of these things. No one with any real understanding of the reality that Russia is uninterested in peace, and Russia will continue to terrorize unless it's destroyed, is anywhere near any position of power right now. So I don't really think it matters that much. But we've got people like him and people like Angela Merkel that got Europe addicted to Russian gas, that got us in this situation, trying to get involved in peace negotiations still. And it's a complete waste of time. And again, I think it's just symbolic that Ukraine are going along with these things. Right now, Ukraine's only negotiation tactic that is working is the long-range strikes, long-range sanctions, as Zelensky calls it. And that's why Ukraine is now pledged to double those by the end of this year, because Ukraine knows that that's the only way that this stops. And there's no conversations that are going to be had with Russia that'll change that.
Caolan, I have started with you visiting Biennale, and I want to finish with that. So my final question is like more broader picture. Is what you saw in Venice, is that an isolated case or part of a wider trend across Europe where Russia is slowly trying to return to polite society through culture events?
this is part of a much bigger and terrible problem, and that's Russia returning to civilized society and Russia being hyper-normalized. It's not just what happened in Venice, it's the Oscars, it's the Olympics, it's the opera houses, it's music festivals, it's Cannes, and it's film festivals. It's every single part of culture and society that the Russians are slowly coming back to again, because we seem to have a short-term memory when it comes to Russia. Again, Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, and the world was shocked and Europe was shocked. And then slowly we got back to normal. Major films were back at Cannes in 2017. The Russians were back at the G7 in 2018. Everything went back to normal. The world was shocked in 2022. Russia was sanctioned. It's now 2026. The Russians are back in every single cultural event. Belarus is now allowed to compete as well. This is going to return to normal every single time. It's like this repetition of madness and repetition of insanity. And it's extremely depressing, and there's nothing else to be said about it. I mean, Ukraine has been screaming about this, activists and politicians in Ukraine, to try and put pressure on these institutions to stop this happening. And it's had almost no impact. And I think it's because of the huge amount of Russian money involved in all of this. In Venice, I hadn't realized the extent of it, but Russia pulled 2 million euros from that event. And I was told by multiple people on the ground, it doesn't matter, because Mikkelsen and Russian billionaires are pummeling money through renovations into the arts festival, so they don't need European money anymore. And the Russians, the one thing that connects all of these things, the arts festival, the music festival, film festivals, is Russian money and people being paid. And until those on the receiving end of that money are investigated, this is going to continue. No Russian money should be allowed anywhere near this continent, not a single penny of it. And that is the only way that this stops. And people should be put in prison for taking it.
As you are finishing your documentary about Venice, you're saying that authoritarian power does not always return wearing a uniform. Sometimes it arrives just for opening night. So I think that's could be like that as well. Caolan, thank you.
That's exactly what it is.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time, and take care.